The mystery of the lonely lighthouse. The appearance of land at the end of a long sea journey must be a welcome sight for any ship's captain. Yet he has to be particularly alert at this stage of the voyage, for in many parts of the world there are often rocky islands close to the shore he is approaching. These islands seem to lie in wait like hunters watching for their prey. Their jagged rocks trap and wreck many ships whose journeys take them too close to their perilous shores. In the past, fires would sometimes be lit at night to mark dangerous sections of coast, but frequently their light was too feeble to penetrate the gloom. Eventually, the idea of a lighthouse was born. This was a tall tower, often located on an island out at sea and carrying a bright light at its top, warning ships of treacherous rocks ahead. 2 or 3 men, called lighthouse keepers, had to live in the lighthouse so that the light could be maintained permanently. But constructing a lighthouse could be extremely difficult. The tale of one such lighthouse shows how difficult it was to build. It is all the more fascinating because of a mystery that later surrounded it. The construction of this lighthouse began in 1895 and, because of the island's isolated location and hostile weather, it took 4 years to complete. The island's light shone out for the first time in December 1899. All went well over the first winter and summer. The crane used to lift all the building materials in the lighthouse's construction was left in place. One look at the list of supplies regularly taken by boat to the lighthouse shows why the crane was required. The metal containers of oil for the lamp, and the boxes of food and wooden barrels of fresh water needed by the keepers for survival, were extremely heavy. Every fortnight a shipload of supplies was brought from the mainland to the lighthouse. On the 26th of December, 1900, the delivery ship drew near the island, and its crew noticed immediately that something was wrong. There was no welcoming flag flying from the lighthouse pole, although the delivery ship would have been expected. However, it was possible the keepers were busy working out of sight on the other side of the island, and, therefore, had not noticed the ship approaching. The captain ordered the ship's whistle to be sounded, but the shrill blast brought only thousands of seabirds from the cliff face, noisy and angry at being disturbed. There was no movement in or around the lighthouse. With mounting astonishment, the captain ordered a rocket to be fired over the island, and, although it burst its colorful contents with a loud explosion, still nothing was seen of the keepers. A small group of sailors was instructed to go ashore and find out what was wrong. Perhaps, they thought, the keepers were ill and could not venture out of the lighthouse. They climbed aboard a small boat and rowed ashore. The sailors' leader went to the top of the cliffs on which the lighthouse perched, and began running along the pathway, calling out the names of the keepers. But the only answer that came was the howling of the gales. The keepers normally opened the entrance gate of the yard when a delivery was expected, but on this particular day the gate was closed. It creaked open at his touch and he moved towards the lighthouse itself. He was surprised to find the front door was wide open and cautiously he entered. He continued to call out the names of the 3 men, but still no one answered his shouts. In the kitchen, 2 chairs stood next to the table, but the 3rd chair had been knocked over and was lying on its side. Although it was freezing winter weather, the ashes in the fireplace were cold, showing that it was some time since a fire had been lit. All the pots and pans were clean and stacked neatly in their usual places. The clock on the shelf above the fireplace had stopped. The leader then went into the bedrooms and found that the beds were unmade, just as they would be if their occupants had just risen from them and left hurriedly. By now, he was finding it difficult to control his feelings. The hairs were standing up on the back of his neck, and he ran all the way back to the landing point. He breathlessly explained to the crew of the small boat what he had found, and 2 of them volunteered to go back up with him to the lighthouse. This group of 3 combed the outbuildings and the lighthouse itself. On reaching the top of the tower, they found that the warning lamp of the lighthouse was in working order, but there was a thin film of dust over it, suggesting that it had not been lit for some time. In addition, the last entry in the lighthouse's record book was for the Morning of the 15th of December, although normal practice was to complete the record daily, there was still no trace of the three keepers. It was becoming increasingly clear after this second search that no one was there. The men returned to their ship where they informed the captain of what they had found, and what they had been unable to find. Because it was now dark, they had to wait until the following morning to begin to search even more extensively. They began by examining the living area of the lighthouse again. They found that the waterproof clothing of two of the keepers was missing from the cupboard. Even more mysteriously, the third set of waterproof clothing still hung there. Then they went outside and began to investigate the platform where the crane stood. They were surprised to find that the grass had been torn away along the top edge of the cliff. The railings around the platform where the crane stood were broken. Furthermore, a huge boulder, probably weighing over a ton, which had been part of the cliff, had been moved a great distance down the stairway, and was partially blocking it. But of the three lighthouse keepers there was no trace, either then or later. They had disappeared completely. But how? Once the newspapers got hold of the story, there was much speculation, most of it unconvincing. The mystery has never been conclusively solved, but for over a century many explanations as to what happened have been suggested. One theory is that violence broke out and one of the keepers murdered his colleagues and threw them over the cliff. He then jumped over the cliff himself through shame at what he had done. Second theory suggested that the island must have been cursed, because several years later a keeper threw himself from the lighthouse in a fit of depression. A third, and less fanciful, theory is that two of the men got up early and put on their waterproof clothing to go to the landing to repair the devastation of a night of particularly stormy weather. Could it be that the third man, watching from the lighthouse, saw a huge black hurricane cloud sweeping towards his two colleagues and rushed out to warn them, knocking over a chair as he did so? Could it be that all three men were then swept away by the wind? Since that fateful day, the island's light has shone without further mishap. In 1971 the last keepers departed. The lighthouse is now operated by a computer. The only visitors these days are many species of seabird and an annual maintenance crew, complete with mobile phones.